Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Men for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegran, that's G-R-A-N, group, at edinarealty.com, or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 7-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winners.
On this episode, David and Dan recap all the happenings of the Twins' 2025 spring training, including the heartbreaking news that Royce Lewis will begin the season on the IL. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win. My name is David Kufis. With me, as always, is Dan Thompson. We were worried, Dan, that we had a week before the season started, before our prediction show. Did we really need to work in another episode? There wasn't going to be much to talk about. But my goodness, Dan, the spreadsheet is chock full of topics.
Yeah, thanks, Royce. And your hamstring this time, I think. I remember where I was when Hogs texted, the Royce's hurts, and then it was, and then we were waiting, and I don't know, I watched the replay. I will say, looking at his face and his reaction, I could have told you right then that he was not as injured as he was last year.
I don't believe that man's ever been to medical school.
Dr. Dan's opinion is always appreciated.
But Hogs asked that he wanted to know what I thought medically. And sure enough, Royce said it wasn't as painful, but it's still moderate. Moderate isn't mild.
Well, I'm a little bit confused about that because I saw the same tweet from, I think, 6 different people that changed things from mild to moderate, and then I saw some that changed it from moderate to mild, and I'm like, I don't think those are the same words.
They're
now,
not.
Dan, as an English teacher, yes, you can tell us for sure with authority that they're not the same word.
I'm no climatologist either, but mild El Nino and a moderate El Nino are different things. Like, but they must apply to the same way here in Royce's hamstrings and quadriceps and things like that. But I trust the man. He's been through a lot of pain, and he's been through a lot of injuries, and he knows his body, and he says this one didn't hurt as bad. But at least he did it now and not on March 27th or March 28th. I'd rather he open the season on the injured list than go on the injured list on the first day of the season.
Yeah, that was rough. That was a rough go last season. But folks, hey, if you're just tuning in for the first time, this is not our typical format. Typically, we have a show after each Twins series. We have segments we work through. It's a whole bit, lots of fun. But this is a little bit more informal. We just sort of talk about the news from spring training as we're getting ready for the season. So thanks for tuning in. If it's your first time, if you've been here a long time, thanks so much for listening. But yeah, Royce Lewis, obviously the big news out of the gate. It's still unclear what the timetable for return is going to be. There's a whole bunch of articles about how upbeat Royce has been about the injury and how, he's really going to push to get back. But he also had concerns, as you just mentioned, Dan, the weather. The weather is going to play a factor in when Royce Lewis will return because we need some warm, early Minnesota weather, I think, to get Royce back on the field sooner.
Yeah, let's see here. We should start looking at the schedule. I mean, I think maybe away for the Guardians on May 1st. Or end of April. I don't think we're going to see him in April. I think that they're going to be super cautious. So I guess that means we're going to see a lot of other guys playing third base when we already had questions about who is going to play second base. So I guess there's room for another guy on the roster in the short term, and I guess the Twins will have to make do with the best. You and Hogs, though, by the way, on your last episode, you were asking if 115 games with Buxton and with Correa and with Lewis together. And I think I should have bet the under on that, given how things are going already.
I don't think there was a bet. There was no board game convention free pass, and I think offered up. But it was interesting because we had this discussion last season. We talked about if you could only have 2 of the big 3, like I think you're pretty happy with that, with the way that this crew has come together. Sure. So I guess I am happy that Buxton and Correa seem to be quietly having spring training. Just normally.
Are they even there? I've barely heard about this.
That's what I'm saying. I read no articles. Every article is about everybody else at spring training. I'm not convinced they're down there, Dan. They're probably fishing somewhere. Did they do the egg toss? Usually we get a nice update on all the roster during the egg toss, but I didn't even hear of that this year. Just Rocco and his llamas, which, by the way, I had never heard the llama story before. And so when you told that on the last episode, I was rolling. I didn't know that
That's a great story. People, if you haven't listened to it, you should listen to the episode. It's worth the whole episode just for that story.
So I did see one thing that was pretty funny after the Royce injury, and it's sad, more sad than funny. But so on the Twins webpage, they had two headlines at one point where one says Lewis's main target for 25, play as many games as possible, and then several links up says Lewis exits spring game early with left hamstring strain.
You just can't write the narratives here. These are pretty great.
No.
So I don't know. I mean, like, because now it opens up so many possibilities. So Cody Perkle at Twins Daily, I'm glad you added this. He asks whether Brooke Lee should stay at third, even with Royce's return. I suppose that's a possibility, but like, what do you think they're going to do now in shuffling the infield? Willie Castro can only play one position at a time.
Maybe. I mean, we haven't tried, to be fair.
That's true.
I mean, let's give him a
you
chance
can't
then.
anymore with the shift rules, so he's stuck.
Well, you could have him play sort of shortstop. Anyway, no, I'm not exactly sure how this shakes out. Clearly, it's going to open up a spot on the roster, and so we'll have to get to that in a moment. But as far as third base in general, I think was workable for Royce Lewis, but he did struggle. Like, we can't pretend like he was this all-star third baseman, because he wasn't. Brooks Lee is a very confident fielder. Obviously, he had his offensive struggles last season, but my goodness, Dan, I feel like every other article is talking about how people think Brooks Lee is going to have a huge year.
Yeah, you pointed out, I think it was a Keith Law article from The Athletic where he thought he was going to have kind of a breakout year. So let's hope that is the case. I still see him as a middle infielder, not as a third baseman. I think we're going to see Jose Miranda playing a whole lot more at third again, because at least he has a track record of playing that spot. And if Ty France is indeed playing first base at a Carlos Santana level, or at least near it, you got to hope that maybe those guys get openings, and that we're looking at depth guys, and maybe it's a Mickey Gasper or a Kersey Jr. or Austin Martin getting some kind of a more elevated role. The Twins have some depth to take care of this. And if we're talking about Royce Lewis from last September, this isn't the worst thing to happen for this team.
No, it is fascinating though when you think about Cody Perkle's idea about keeping Lee at third, because second base is far from sorted, right? Like, they're saying, oh, Willie Castro, Eddie Julian, Mickey Gasper, like, they have options, as you've stated, but I don't know who you want there every game, Dan, now that you know that third base needs to be covered. I think Miranda, his bat is very important, and as we know, I believe he will be one of the best hitters in baseball the next couple of seasons. He will be on everybody's radar very shortly, Dan. But it's one of those things where, as much as I forgot about Correa and Buxton during spring training, Ty France, Dan, after the signing, haven't thought about that guy once. I gotta be honest, I keep forgetting that, like, first base is not Jose Miranda, it's Ty France.
And that's probably a good thing, and the signing looks good right now. The Twins have actually, I mean, and maybe the Vikings are following their lead, but there's a lot of like injury reclamation projects going on between both of those franchises right now, and that's not the worst way to spend your money, given how much injuries can really hamper a guy, especially if he's trying to play through it in the way that France was last year. So I guess maybe it's the less popular take, but I think that maybe Royce being out is not the worst thing in the world. It's not great, but I think if there's a guy of those three that they could lose, I think actually Royce is the most expendable at this time of the year, and then he can make his triumphant return in mid-May.
Losing any of the big three is a big deal, but your point about the way last season ended, it's a sad point to make, but it's accurate. And so it's hard to argue that, yeah, I mean, Buxton and Correa, kind of guys who I would argue are more proven than Royce Lewis. I know it's fun to read those articles about the dark horse MVP candidates, but the sample size, Dan, how often do we have to talk about the sample size?
Oh, man.
And sorry, just to take us off track for just a moment, because of last episode, Dan Thompson, Vikings fan, do you want Aaron Rodgers as your quarterback?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I'm wearing the green hat right now because it's St. Patrick's Day the next day after. I don't want any Aaron Rodgers. It's not like Brett Favre. Brett Favre is a different animal entirely. Aaron Rodgers just is unseemly. Right. I guess Brett Favre is unseemly too, as we learned.
We didn't know as much about Brett Favre while he was playing that we did after the fact, Dan.
No.
Sorry, to push it one step further, though.
Oh, man.
You are not in the camp that would like to see the Vikings perform poorly if Aaron Rodgers is their quarterback, I trust.
No. Give me Joe Flacco, right? Joe Flacco's the guy that I would take. I think I saw an article touting that possibility. So, yeah, give me JJ or give me nothing, I suppose. And that seems to be their strategy.
Okay, well, let's veer back into the baseball world here. Really, the big question is, who takes this roster spot? Because originally, Dan, we were sort of arguing between Lee, Miranda, Martin, Julian, and now Gasper's sort of in the mix. And we had this conversation 2 weeks ago, and there was like no chance that Mickey Gasper is going to make this roster. And now it's like, okay, well, I think clearly Lee is going to make the team. Clearly Julian is going to make the team. I will say, Julian is not good in the field. Like, we know he's not good in the field.
No.
But Dan, watching some of these spring training plays, it's like, oh my goodness. Like, this is sort of embarrassing. Like, there was a play. He's covering second on a stolen base attempt. The ball is just to the right of the second base bag. Perfect throw, right? Like, it would have been a close play, but he definitely should have gotten the ball in a tag. Didn't even catch the ball, Dan. Just went right into center field. And I'm like, okay, I don't think that this man is meant for a middle infield position.
Oh, Canada.
But yet he's on the roster. He's going to make the team. And he's a lefty, too. He's known this all along. He's had a smug smirk for months here. He's been wearing those Hawaiian shirts, and he's ready to bring those back to Minnesota. You just know it. So he's on the team.
So Lee, Julian, Miranda, I think, are locks at this point. So really that leaves one roster spot, Dan. Do you think it goes to Austin Martin, Kersey Jr., or Mickey Gasper? I think those are really the three options.
I want it to go to Kersey Jr. because I feel like having a speed guy off of the bench who can play any of the outfield spots. Because I'm looking at the outfield right now. So we got Wallner, who apparently is like an MVP candidate. Everything that I've read is Matt Wallner's hitting 60 home runs this year. And then there's Buxton. And then there's Larnach. And then you've got Bader, surely. And I guess Castro can play the outfield. So I want it to be, I brought this up a month ago, the best man gets the job. But I think it's going to be Gasper because he's a switch hitter. He can play three positions. Rocco loves that. He would love to be able to use Jeffers, Vasquez, and another catcher in the same game. So I think it's going to be Gasper.
I think that he's got a real shot now. And I think is for the exact reason you just said. And Rocco was even quoted about saying how cool it would be to be able to pinch run for our catchers late in games, knowing that Gasper can come in and catch a couple innings and it's not a problem. And I just think our Rocco, man, he loves that strategy. He loves those moves.
I can't compete with you physically, and you're no match for my brain.
He loves to tinker, and there's no more tinkering a guy can do than a guy who can play catcher, first base, and second base. Between him and Willie Castro,
I was going to say,
everything is covered, Dan.
I think that position battle will be interesting to watch. But we also need to look at the bullpen because that spot seems to be the other area. I will mention the rotation quick. So with the way that the cuts fell, it's very clear that the rotation is going to be Lopez, Ryan, Ober, Paddock, and Woods Richardson, which is what we predicted and what most people predicted. This is not anything new, but Festa and Matthews are kind of those sixth and seventh starters waiting in AAA. But the way that the injuries have happened have really opened up some spots in the reliever situation. And Iverson Castellanos' situation as a Rule 5 pick kind of is another wrinkle to this. So what? How about you run down kind of the injuries here, and then we'll kind of slot guys in.
Yeah, so Michael Tonkin will begin the season on the IL, so he will not be a part of the bullpen to start the season. Justin Topa actually pitched on Monday, and he seems like he's going to be good for opening day. So
let's hope so. Poor Justin Topa.
And Brock Stewart also still hopeful to be ready for opening day. A quick note here, not so much impacting the bullpen, but Matt Cantorino is out for the season with shoulder surgery.
Oh, man.
Oof. I love that he's a board game guy, but maybe you got to stretch between turns or something, man.
I couldn't help but think of the Parks and Rec episode with Coens of Dunshire, though, because I got to think that Matt Cantorino is going to see this as an opportunity to build the board game that he's always wanted. If people haven't watched that clip, it's hilarious. It's definitely it's a very accurate representation of the kind of games that David and I would love to play. But you do feel bad for the guy. You might call him Matt Cantor Catch a Break. Poor guy.
Goodness,
it's like a pun. It's a play on words.
I do get it.
It works so well because it's from Parks and Rec. The sound is from Parks and Rec. It works perfectly. Also, if you haven't been watching Severance on Apple TV, knowing the Ben character from Parks and Rec and then the Mark character from Severance, it's just a really funny thing. Like, if you wanted to watch a couple of episodes of Parks and Rec with Ben in them and then move to Severance, you would sort of like start to question your reality a little bit about what is happening here.
So then when we look at the relievers, we see Duran, Stewart, Jax, Topa, Alcala, who knows how long he'll actually stay.
He best cover first, Dan. That's what I'll tell you for sure.
Danny Coulomb, because he's a lefty. That's his only justification, I think, for keeping him on this roster. And then Cole Sands, the oft-forgotten. So that's 7. They'll keep another one. Tonkin's out of the way. So I see this as either Louis Varland or Iverson Castellano, which is an interesting call, given the fact that Castellano has to be on the roster, or they give him back to the Phillies, or I suppose they could execute a trade. Twins Daily was mentioning this about a week ago too.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. He did not help his chances, Dan, because he got absolutely lit up in his last appearance. Louis Varland, though, his velocity is up, really, really up. I think that at this point, you got to think they go with Varland, right? Because I don't think they're going to put Varland in AAA as a reliever. You know, does that make it? You know what I'm saying?
It totally makes sense. I think the only way that Iverson would have made it is if Tonkin, or I shouldn't say him, but if Topa, or if Stewart wasn't available, I think. And I imagine that they thought he was kind of an insurance policy for those guys anyhow.
Yeah.
So it's too bad, but I do wonder about that trade exploration. Could you try to keep him around if you like him long? If you like him enough to take him in the Rule 5, you would think that you like him enough to give up future considerations or some cash or something for him. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's like half of the value or whatever they have to pay him, and it
is that how that? There's a structure. So that's something to follow here. Now we're talking about 8th guy in the bullpen, but I think. Yes. By the end of the year, I mean, Cody Funderburk is down in AAA. They already sent him back, but we'll see him at some point. So then it becomes, do we see any other guys join the 40-man? Because aside from Castellano, Varland, and Funderburk, all the other relievers in AAA are not on the 40-man. So I imagine we'll see somebody down the road once somebody gets injured or Brock Stewart hurts himself again or something like that.
Don't say things like that, Dan.
It's hard, though, because you see these pitchers get hurt so frequently, and it's like, well, what do? You assume that they're going to get hurt at some point, or somebody will.
So quick note here about the roster moves that have taken place. There's some specifics about whether a guy is reassigned to AAA that has to do with their options versus actually being let go and assigned to minor league camp. We're not getting into the details on that. Just quick notes. Ryan Jensen, Andrew Morris, and Diego Cartaya were reassigned to minor league camp, and then Zebby Matthews, David Festa, Luke Keeschel, and that's probably the biggest name. Cody Funderburk and Alex Spies were again reassigned to minor league camp. Final two moves, Yar Camargo, he was the catcher who apparently is going to be taken over by Mickey Gasper, has been optioned to AAA. And then Darren McCain. I have so much trouble with these Irish names, Dan. Can you help me here?
McCowan, I don't know, something like that. Yeah, we're beyond our depth here, but he is sent down. And then so also Yanoa was sent down as well to reassign to minor league camp. So guys that we may hear of, Keeschel is on the 40-man, and so you would think that at some point we will see him this year too. Hopefully he's playing well enough and staying healthy at AAA.
With the large amount of infielders we currently have, I think he has a long way or a lot of injuries preventing him from getting to the majors this season. But Dan, the way this team works, it wouldn't shock me if come July we see Luke Keeschel make his MLB debut.
A couple other things to talk about. So it's interesting to see who does and who does not get attention from national media.
Yes.
When they look at the Twins, right? So we talked about Brooks Lee getting some attention there as a breakout candidate, mostly because he's going to be a second-year pro and he played a lot. And his weaknesses were shown. But again, he's a son of a coach. He's a smart player. I think he's going to make adjustments. I have more faith in him, honestly, long-term than I do for Eddie Julian.
The way you said son of a coach, like you said son of a so close.
Oh, yes.
I was like, what's Dan? We're a family show here, my friend. Like, what are you saying?
But Joe Ryan and Bailey Ober are both getting Cy Young dark horses by MLB.com. David, are they checking out your tweets or something like that? You have been talking about this for so much longer.
I am so excited to watch these guys pitch, and honestly, if they stay healthy, I think they have a really good chance to have fantastic seasons. And we all know that my love for Bailey Ober is through the roof. I have a signed picture given to me by my daughter. My heart still melts, Dan, every time I look at that picture, knowing that she chose to get me this picture as opposed to her squishmallow cat that her heart so desired, Dan.
But did you have a point about Ryan and Ober beyond that?
Oh, just that I think that the more I look at this infield alignment, the more I'm concerned for our pitchers who I think are well above average. Like I'm looking at this and I understand Correa is rock solid at shortstop. And then there's guys playing those positions, Dan, who filling out the lineup card right now. I don't know how much money I'd be willing to bet that I could nail how Rocco's first lineup will look. But I think defensively, Dan, there's two categories I'm worried about. It's the defense in total and also stolen bases. Those are two places that I think this team is likely to struggle, and you can see it in articles where they're like, hey, Jose Miranda's going to play third base, and the Twins might just deal with him knowing that he's going to be a liability there if he's producing offensively.
I am not throwing away my
shut. And then when you see language like, I forget which article it was, but I LOL'd, Dan, in real life when they said they're just going to be okay with him not doing great there and trusting that the offense will score enough runs to make up for it. And I'm just thinking, last year, Dan, we couldn't buy a run. So I appreciate that. I do think our pitchers are going to be phenomenal this year, including Joe Ryan and Bailey Ober. But I do worry, Dan, that they are going to have to do so much of the heavy lifting because I don't know that you're going to be able to trust your outfield. The defensive run saved, Dan, that's not going to be a figure that's going to be pretty for the Twins this season.
Yeah, lots of strikeouts. Let's hope that they're just not even letting them get on base. Well, a couple other things, and this is actually something I teased you a little bit about this. You're excited about F1 starting up, and good on you. But 4 televisions, set up in one space. It was like a TV studio. So what is there to watch on 4 televisions in F1? I'm struggling to see what I would want to see in baseball for 4 televisions.
So it's the coolest thing. So I'm getting rid of DirecTV because now we have Twins TV. I'm very excited about it.
Thank goodness.
And so I had to find a way to watch F1. And F1 offers this premium subscription where basically you control whatever you want to see. And I'm still pretty new to F1. I don't fully understand the strategy. And like a lot of times guys talk like, oh, they shouldn't have done this. And I'm like, they're going real fast, you know?
Sure, exactly.
But anyway, so the coolest thing about it is, so the way that I had it set up at home is on the main feed, I had just the standard race feed that I would watch all last season. Then on the smaller TV, and then the 2 tablets I had in front of me, you can choose the onboard to ride along with any of the drivers. So what I did is I just put the first place and the second place driver on the tablets and the TV. And then on the last screen, I had like the actual tracking and telemetry of all the cars going around the track. So it's super interesting to watch that way because you're just taking in so much information, and to be able to watch a pass happen and quickly flip over to the onboard camera of the guy who's trying to pass the other dude. Super fun to watch, Dan.
So is this like miking up Carlos Correa? Like, is that what this would be, but cameraing up Carlos Correa in baseball?
Yes. Well, in F1 super interesting because all of the radio calls between the teams are just public. Like they just put those radio calls out for the fans to listen to. So it would be like you being able to hear what the catcher and pitcher are saying on the mound, like when they're talking strategy.
See, that would be cool. I want to hear what the outfielders are saying in those little meetings that they have.
Yeah.
You know, and so that information would be interesting. I don't think that's coming to baseball because of the trash cans.
I want to build a championship culture.
So I think, well, and more seriously, I think baseball wants to keep that information secret.
Yes.
That's a trade secret a little bit more with baseball. I do got to say, though, I would love to have a camera on Tommy Watkins at all times. You know, just to be able to know whether he's sending guys around third or he's putting up the stop sign.
Well, and I think you will. And so that's sort of the comparison I made with the tweet that I sent, is that I'm so curious what Twins TV will offer as far as, can you have 2 or 3 different camera feeds on different screens? Because Dan, that's like I've said before, I really love watching baseball at home. I love going to the stadium. You know, I got season seats. I love being there. It's a great experience. However, if I'm more interested in just watching, right? If I'm not going so I can like be with someone and enjoy their company, I would much rather just sit at home and watch the screen. But being in person is so cool because you get to see the defensive alignments. You get to see the entirety of the play from the crack of the bat to the ball in the glove. Whereas when you're watching at home, you're pretty much bound to what the cameras are showing you. And so you miss a lot of that information you get when you're at the stadium. And so I'm hoping with Twins TV, even if they have like a wide angle cam, and then you could have a couple of different options for other feeds, super interesting. And I'd be very excited to watch baseball in that way from home.
It does sound interesting. I just only have one television, so I couldn't like put it all. Maybe it's a big enough screen I can split screen it or something.
Yeah. Well, and do you have children's tablets? Because that's what I was using in that picture.
I could just take all of theirs.
I was just stealing all of my children's
Dad
things.
Needs the green iPad.
Well, that is the nice thing about F1 is the race this time was at like 11 p.m. So the kids were, well, they didn't even know. I had them charged up ready the next day when we had screen time. It was great.
All right, so a couple things. Nelson Cruz.
I'm not dead.
Who apparently is going to be like a Twins Hall of Famer here or something like that. He's throwing out the first pitch on opening day. It feels a little soon.
Yeah.
You know, for a guy who was with the Twins for a couple seasons, and good on him, and they were memorable seasons, but they weren't that memorable. I mean, like, They were memorable, and then there was another playoff out. So, like, you posed a good question here. First, before we get to that, do you have thoughts on Nelson throwing out this pitch?
I think it's great, and yeah, I do think he was well loved by the fan base when he was here, but it does feel a little bit weird just because he wasn't here all that long, and I do wonder how much of this is the front office and ownership trying to be like, let's bring back the feels here, because people are not thrilled with us right now.
But this question is interesting. So what other players do you think have had a meaningful impact? And I'm asking, you wrote this question, a meaningful impact on the team that were here for such a short time. So I gave two answers. I think Jim Thome and Jack Morris. Did anybody else come to mind, or do you like those picks?
I think they're great. Jim Thome was the first name that came to mind. And now more recently, Dan, Carlos Santana needs to be mentioned. Like, just for the season he had, I realized the team as a whole was terrible, but Carlos Santana was a wonderful bright spot last season. And I think that really his leadership at first base was a big part of the success that the team had when they had it for that, 60-game stretch in the middle of the season.
And when I looked at Jack Morris's stats, I didn't realize he was only with the Twins for a season. And now he's a Minnesota guy, and so I think he's got that tied in. But his 91 season was the only one. He was with Detroit from 77 to 89. No, 90. Then he was with the Twins for a year. Now, they won the World Series that year. So that was a big deal. But this is amazing. 35 starts, 10 complete games, 246 innings, just from a different era. But I think if he wasn't on a World Series winning team, then I think that maybe that's a little bit different. But I thought he was for there longer. He went to Toronto for the next 2 years, and then Cleveland finished out his career. So I couldn't think of anybody else off the dome. If somebody else, by the way, has any thoughts on that, we'd love to hear. And whether you have those thoughts, you could text the show, and we would love to hear from more of you.
I meant to mention this when we were talking about Royce, but literally the second that Aaron Gleeman sent that tweet about Royce being injured, we got a text to the show that just says, is Royce even stretching at all? Which I thought was pretty hilarious. Folks, if you do text the show, which we would love, as Dan said, put your name, give a name and an initial or whatnot so we can give you credit for the funny stuff that you guys send. It's really entertaining for us to read, and I'm sure the other listeners would enjoy hearing that.
All right, so then you have this note about fantasy baseball. Now, you invited me, and I said that I just can't. I can't invest in it, even if it's a weekly roster update. It's been a good 10 years, and I loved fantasy baseball. I gave up parts of family vacations over spring breaks to do 4-hour auction drafts because goodness knows you have to have like 30 guys. But you're back in fantasy baseball. And I worry now that it's going to be like when I'm hanging around people who know the Enneagram and they're all talking about their numbers and whatever they are on this psychological test. And I'm worried now when I'm with you and Hogs, you're just going to talk about obscure fantasy baseball stats here. So I don't know. I'm worried maybe I should have joined to be in on it, but I think I'm just going to make fun of you. I think that's what I'm going to do instead.
That's reasonable. And folks, full disclosure, what I'm about to say right now will likely be the only thing you'll hear me say about fantasy baseball the entirety of the season outside of when I'm chastising Hogs.
18th. Let's see what about. Okay, all right, we got this time stamped.
Outside of when I'm chastising Hogs for talking about his fantasy baseball team, because nobody cares, Dan. Like, there's a lot of topics that you could talk about that people don't care about. There's not many topics that people care less about than your fantasy teams in whatever sport. I will say, though, that this particular league, they had a contest for the best name, and I won. I was very excited.
You did win?
I did.
Oh, good. Because with all these options, I would hope the time that you spent coming up with a name here, this is brilliant. It's worth joining it just for the name.
Just for the name. So this is with a bunch of guys from church, and so I haven't been in fantasy baseball for a long, long time. I'm very excited to get back into it. But so I wanted a name that was both biblical and from the Twins, obviously. So I'm gonna hit you with all of them. I'll leave the one that I went with for last. But so these were my choices. I had Gold Frankincense and Jose Miranda, which I thought was pretty good. Onward Christian Vasquez Soldiers, which I like that one. I just don't like Christian Vasquez very much, so it would be hard to have that. This is a deep cut for you Old Testament scholars, though. Blood Over the Doorframe, I thought was pretty good. And then this was given to me by a buddy, actually, so credit here is due. But Griffin the Jacks Collector, which I thought that was pretty good. Matt Wallner of Jericho, After the Walls of Jericho. And the one that I went with that won the contest was O Come Emmanuel Rodriguez.
See, it works on double many levels because we're waiting for Emmanuel Rodriguez to join the Twins.
Exactly.
Think, right?
Yes.
That's great.
But anyway, so again, I know no
you
one
gotta
cares.
play the pun. You have to play the pun sounded for that.
It's like a pun. It's a play on words.
See,
I do get it.
It was a whole bunch of
Thank
puns,
you.
Dan, all at once. But so this is the last thing I'll say about fantasy baseball and my fantasy baseball team. I know nobody cares. I did get Pablo Lopez. I did get Royce Lewis in a late round. And then I also did get Pete Alonso, Dan. Pete Alonso's on my fantasy baseball team.
3 future Hall of Famers right there.
All of them, Dan. First ballot, no question.
Well, the last thing we want to do today is kind of look around the league because there were some interesting storylines that are also Twins tangential. And the first one I want to bring up is the Tampa Bay Rays. Their stadium roof was literally ripped off earlier, so they're playing at the Yankees AAA stadium, which is already an insult enough for the Rays. They're playing the whole year there, probably even part of next year. But it turns out they're not going to build the stadium in St. Petersburg, the new one, where they wanted to, or something like that, with some disputes of the cities. First off, as a Twins fan, Tampa Ray fans, I hear you, right? Like, I mean, we've been through this before with the Metrodome and other things. So hang in there. But that said, why would they build another stadium in St. Petersburg that's so far away from Tampa and so hard to get to? Like,
yes.
It's probably the right choice to not build one there.
Yeah, I'm curious what the long game is here, though, Dan. Like,
right.
There's no real option, I think, unless they're going to build in Tampa, which I know nothing about Florida. Let's start there. But from what I understand is that the stadium
it's in the
needs
southeast,
to be
right? Eastern
no, I
time
wasn't
zone.
even going to guess where Tampa is, Dan. Like, I assume it's near water. I guess I'll go with that. I assume there's a good
If there's
chance.
one state Minnesotans know where it is, it's Florida, right?
Yeah, that's
you have to fly to, but then you get on a plane and then you get off and you're there.
You're
Like,
there.
You don't even know.
But so I understand they have to build that stadium in Tampa if that team is going to have any sort of realistic fan base and fan attendance. And if they don't, Dan, isn't it more likely that they just move if they're not going to build a stadium?
I mean, send them back to Montreal. Not back to Montreal, but like send them to Montreal. Give them a team up there in Canada.
Would you stick with the Expos? You'd have to, right?
You'd have to go back to the Expos.
What is an Expo? I don't know what that is, Dan.
It's like a marker. You know, it's like
I don't
like when
think
you
that's
write
the
on
team
a
wasn't
whiteboard.
named after dry erase markers, Dan. No, seriously.
Well, no, it's
what-
named after Expo markers, not Dryer. It's a rival company. An Expo, I'd have to look it up. What is
This is
an
great
Expo?
radio right here. People are sitting in their cars just like these idiots. Like
I
what
don't know if you want to write the show, like the baseball team. It didn't come up with much there. It's no, it doesn't even say. Thank you, AI. See, this is why I don't like AI. Oh, here we go. They're literally named after the 1967 World's Fair, Expo 67, held in Montreal.
You know, maybe you don't go back to Expos.
You need a new name. Come on. Well, the Canadians is so much better. You know, so much more descriptive.
The Habs. They'll do it, Dan.
Montreal nicknames. There's got to be something else. Anyway, go back, pick a different team.
So another news item here, Dan, for your Seattle team, actually.
Yes,
So
indeed.
the Mariners have an ambidextrous pitcher, Dan. So my question to you is, would you rather have a switch hitter or a switch pitcher?
I think Rocco would rather have a switch pitcher. Wouldn't that oh my gosh.
No, they bought it backward. Tell them to turn it around.
I'm just imagining Rocco rotate. All right, now rotate 180 degrees. Okay, now rotate back. You know, throw him off a little bit. I would rather have a switch pitcher because it's cooler, but it can't be mechanically sound. Like the depths to which they go to become a lefty or righty, I think is pretty remarkable. So I don't think how far along is this guy?
Well, I'm not exactly sure where he is in their system, but I have a couple of questions. First of all, if he has to get Tommy John on one of the arms, is he good enough to just pitch with the other one? And then just think about it. If Ohtani, Dan, could pitch with both hands, you would think that he would be able to pitch, and then when the other arm needs Tommy John, he can just go back. I mean, really, this is the way of the future, Dan. You know the end of that Leonardo DiCaprio movie where he's like, the way of the future, the way of the future. That's all I think about when I see this guy pitching with both hands. The other thing, I'm sort of ambidextrous. I can do a lot of things with both hands. I don't know why. I've never been able to explain this to anybody because they're like, "Oh, are you a lefty?" And I'm like, "Sometimes," because I don't really know. The biggest benefit here, Dan, is I write left-handed and I use my mouse with my right hand, which is actually
that makes you like a superstar.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I am convinced, Dan, that has furthered my career as far as it will possibly go, simply because I can do those two things at one time.
The name of the young man who could do this, by the way, is Girangelo Sinte, I believe. There's a couple J's in his last name. I'm not totally sure how to pronounce that.
Couple of J's in there.
So that's him. So there he is. So we'll be rooting for him, I suppose. And like you said, I mean, that would be massive.
Oh, it's huge. So speaking of pitching, Dan, speaking of pitching.
Well, don't worry, be happy.
Our guy, Happy Joey Gallo, was released from the White Sox, which I'm sure there is not much more demoralizing for a Major League Baseball player than being released from the Chicago White Sox. But so he posts on X, hey guys, I'm not done yet. I'm going to switch and try pitching for a change, which, can you imagine? First of all, has this been done in MLB history where a guy spent his whole career in the outfield or infield and now he's just going to be a pitcher? And second of all, what are the odds that you give this that Joey Gallo makes a major league team as a pitcher in the next couple of seasons?
Oh, he's not going to. But it's a great story. They'll make a movie. They'll get Jim Caviezel to play him or something like that. Like, it'll be magical.
So there was trouble with the curve. What would Joey's title be? Because it has to be something about strikeouts, right? Like,
yeah, trouble with the fastball down the middle, I think would be the problem for Joey Gallo.
Trouble with the fastball.
Poor Joey. No, I mean, good on him. He loves the sport. Maybe he's been a Gold Glover, so there's that going for him. But I like it. I like the chutzpah that he's showing here in trying to figure this out. But I don't think so. Hopefully somebody picks him up and it makes a nice story about a Double-A pitcher.
Yeah. Great.
Sorry, Joey. We like Joey Gallo. He seems like a nice clubhouse guy.
They could call it Miracle 2.
There you go. Do you believe in miracles? Yeah.
Do you believe in miracles? Joey Gallo gets out of an inning after pitching 2/3. Like, do you believe in miracles?
I'll take that if Danny Coulomb can get 3 guys out who aren't lefties in a row. So
what drama, what a game, what a finish.
That's a good segue into the next thing you have on the notes.
Listeners of the show will know, big soccer fan. I love me some soccer. I understand it. I watch every minute of...
You like soccer shows. You like TV shows that are tangentially about soccer.
Correct, and that just show me the stuff that's interesting that happens in the game, because no matter how hard I try to watch a full game of soccer, Dan, can't do it. Anyway, the USL, again, didn't realize this was a league, but it is a professional...
We did. There's a team in Spokane in one of the lower tiers. So this relegation is pretty exciting here in Spokane, I think.
Okay, great. So USL, which is not the MLS, so just so we're clear, this took me a little bit, honestly, to sort this out. So MLS is Major League Soccer. They operate very similarly to the other 4 major pro sports, where it's a closed league. They have the set teams and the set cities, and that's all she wrote. However, the USL is a separate league that has tiers. And if you're familiar with soccer, again, the brilliant soccer mind that I am, they have this whole process of promotion and relegation in the other leagues throughout the world. But basically, if you finish in the bottom of your league, you actually get sent down a tier to a worse league. And obviously, vice versa, if you finish at the top of your league, you get promoted to the league above yours. The USL is doing that in the US. And a lot of people are thinking that this is going to be really big and probably going to cut into the margins of MLS because people love this idea of relegation.
I think that it's cool, and I hope that they actually just, like, the MLS teams, like, just say, yeah, we'll just join you. They won't. They won't say that. But I do think this is a better thing for soccer because I think it hasn't worked. Like, MLS has been around basically my whole life, and I just don't care that much about it. It's just not that interesting. I would much rather follow a European soccer team, and I don't have the bandwidth to follow all of these teams. I've never even been to a Loons game, and I would love to go. Like, it sounds great in theory. But I will say it's funny because I do think this is because of Ted Lasso and Wrexham, right? I think people thought, oh, maybe Americans understand this now, and they'll go for it. Which, by a 4th season for Ted Lasso, I don't know. I was happy with 3.
I was happy with 1. I think they should have called it after 1.
Oh, man, we don't have time. We need a whole other podcast.
We need a whole other
episode.
episode.
Ted Lasso.
Speaking of, we have a new show coming.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, we'd love to.
Men for the Win in the film room. Oh,
my gosh.
But Dan and I have a long-standing disagreement about the merits of Ted Lasso. But it is sort of nuts that they're giving it a season 4. It seems sort of cheap and a monetary move, if we say less artistic, which is a little bit disappointing. But I do think you're right that some of these shows have really shown that people have an interest, especially with this relegation promotion stuff. It's so foreign and it's so different from everything we know as sports in the US. It's just it's different. So it's fun, Dan. It's different. So it's interesting.
And thank goodness that's not going to work with baseball, right? You can't mess with the system. I mean, and quite honestly, the baseball has its own interesting and useful system of AAA, AA, and single A and things like that. So I think baseball has got its own unique system that I think works pretty well. Now, we have one more international type thing to bring up here, and it's that the Dodgers and the Cubs, I guess by the time you're listening to this, have probably finished their short 2-game series over in Tokyo. Pretty cool. Obviously, Ohtani is part of that mix. But they even, I think, played some exhibition games against some teams from the Japanese league. I think this is kind of cool. Would you want the Twins to be a part of something like this?
I mean, they never would because they don't have the draw, obviously. But no, I don't think I would. I think that this is cool. I just don't like that it actually counts. And I realize we're talking about 162 games here, so sure. What's 2 games spent abroad? That's fine. But it's different with the NFL in London, right? You can organize it so teams have bye weeks. There's plenty of time to get used to things. But the way that you have to do this where you're playing 2 games and then you have a couple of weeks or 10 days until you play baseball again that actually matters, that just feels really counterintuitive. So I think it's just sort of funny that the season has started, Dan, but nobody really feels like the season has started. So I think it's cool for the promotion of the game and whatnot, but I don't fully buy in, I guess. Like, I didn't wake up at 5:30 this morning. I'll watch the highlights, obviously, but I didn't wake up early to watch these games. It just doesn't feel so real to me.
Yeah, I think Mariners fans out here, if Ichiro had been part of this, I think that there's a lot of excitement for an international series or something like that.
Yeah.
So, but Twins just we don't have that fan base. Nishioka didn't quite take off, I think.
I was going to go with Bronco Park, but yeah.
So, players of Asian descent have not exactly succeeded in the Twins organization. So
no.
So we'll see. Well, David, so this has been fun. We will have our next episode will be our season preview, and so we will walk through all of these attempts at us looking into our crystal ball to decide what we think is going to happen with this Twin season. And Royce already complicated this with his injury, so I gotta redo all of my picks, David.
It's a very confusing time for the prediction show. I'm excited to make the pick stand, but I have to be honest, a lot of times I go in and I have a pretty good idea what I'm going to do. I'm at a loss right now, Dan, for how I'm going to make these picks.
Maybe we'll be better off that way, based on how we did last year. Well, I think if that's all right, I'm going to go ahead and send us out. Folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on X at Min for the Win. You can find our Min for the Win Facebook and Instagram pages. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast on your favorite platform so you're notified when new episodes are available. And if you could leave us a rating or a like, we'd greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show further, you can find us on Patreon. The link is in the description. Thanks for listening, and as always, go Twins. That'll wrap up another episode of Min for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, 2 avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins.